Okay, so we have said about man and woman that there is a difference in man and woman before the fall, not a result of sin, not part of the punishment. We looked at all the examples of women in leaderly type roles throughout the Bible, women as prophetesses throughout the Old Testament and in the New Testament, prophesying as far as we can tell in mixed company in gatherings. We looked at Deborah as the judge and involved in the military. We looked at the wise woman who represents the city of one of the cities in Israel. We looked at whether or not women were deaconesses, and we said it seems like they probably were to some extent, maybe just the ones that were wives of husbands that were deacons. That's possible. We don't really know. We looked at Romans 16 and Junia as an apostle and said likely she was a little a apostle, not authority, big name apostle, but just meaning messenger, which we would think of today as sort of a missionary church planter type, was involved on the frontiers of the gospel, but was never set over a church as an elder, never in that sort of authority type role. We looked at Priscilla, who did a lot of, who at least one time takes Apollos aside and teaches him the way of God more accurately, and is listed 5 more times in the New Testament as doing things. We said that throughout the Bible, women have never been the highest spiritual authority, whether it be priests of the Old Testament, apostles, elders in the New, that those roles were always assigned to men, even though women have done basically everything else, and have involved in roles that at least have some sort of teaching along with them, even if not authoritative. Last time we looked at the universal priesthood of all believers, that we are all priests from the moment we're converted. We are priests, but that doesn't mean that we don't have role differences and even gender differences. We looked at Galatians 3:28, which says there is neither male nor female. And we said that too is a statement about all of us being totally equal at the foot of the cross, but it's not a statement about the difference in roles, but a statement about value. And we all have equal value, no difference, man or woman. We said also that feminism and that movement tends to devalue women, in fact, and women's roles by saying there should be no distinction. We said if you have a bear and a lion says, you should think of me more like you think of the bear, then the lion is making it less impressive to be a lion. And the same thing happens. One of the underlying problems with feminism is that feminism says you should treat women the same as you treat men, or better, you should value, or you should see women the same way you see men. And that would be like the lion saying, you should see lions the same way you see bears, when they are different and they are wonderful in their differences. They are phenomenal in their differences. They are meaningful in their differences. And to say that you should see them the same is to negate the beauty of the differences that God has created. And then we said, lastly, last time, we looked at 1 Peter 3:7 and the idea of the woman as the weaker vessel. And we said a lot about that, but we said that it's this idea of the woman being more precious, like the glassware that you don't use very often in your home, but you put in a special place so the kids can't reach it, versus the plastic cup, which is the man, which gets tossed around and tends to bounce more easily, but is less precious in that way. That you should treat the woman with more honor, it says in 1 Peter 3:7, show honor to this woman, to the weaker vessel, etc. And of course, the physical weakness is probably in view there as well. The sort of philosophical question that we said must be asked in all these places are you okay with God being God? If the Bible really says that, for our discussion today, if the Bible really says that the husband is the authority over the wife, are you okay with that? If God was to say only redheaded men can be elders, would you be okay with just redheaded? Can God make the call and you just be okay with it? That's a question we have to ask constantly with going to the Bible. Are we okay with what God says if we're sure he says it, regardless of how it makes me feel? It's a crucial question. Okay, I said last time we would start with the one thing I didn't get to last time, which was the women having the gift of teaching and those things. I moved that to the bottom, or to after marriage, because I just want to deal with marriage today and not divide it up. Okay, so we're gonna look at this topic of marriage, which the biblical teaching on is really astounding, and is the clearest picture of this complementarian viewpoint, that men and women are made differently but beautifully, rightly in their differences, to complement each other. C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity, quote that I read this week in preparing for this, he says this: the Christian idea of marriage is based on Christ's words that a man and a wife are to be regarded as a single organism. But this is what the words one flesh would be in modern English. And the Christians believe that when he said this, he was expressing a sentiment, not expressing a sentiment, but stating a fact. Just as one is stating a fact when one says that a lock and its key are one mechanism. or that a violin and its bow are one musical instrument. So this is the idea of Christian marriage, that the bow and the violin are different, but they are one instrument. They are beautiful and necessary in their individuality, but they are most beautiful in that complementarity, that they are made in that sense for each other. So we have, in marriage, we have totally equal in value, husband and wife, but different in roles. That seems to be the pattern we've seen from Genesis to Revelation. Different in roles, totally equal in value. Okay. Let's talk about this idea of the husband as the head, or the headship of the husband. Is that true? We talk about that. Is that really a biblical idea? We say it all the time. Is it really true? Is the Bible really that backwards? Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Couple verses we'll look at. 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Verse 3. Is it really true that the husband is the head of the wife? This is one of the most least. This is one of the most least. Great job. This is one of the least appreciated ideas about Christianity modernly. So there's a few things in the modern world that offend the world about what the Bible teaches. Homosexuality, probably the chief one at the moment. But this is 1B, 2, 3. I mean, it's up there at least in the top few. The idea that a woman has any sort of authority over, or a husband has any sort of authority over a wife is an audacious claim in the 21st century, in 2022. Hopefully this doesn't continue, whatever is going on. In the 21st century, that is an audacious claim. So surely the Bible doesn't really say that. Verse 3, I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of a wife is her husband. Shucks. And the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered, etc. Okay, so it does say that. That's what it says. Right? It's pretty clear, actually, that's what it says. The husband is the head of the wife. Look at one more place. Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. Of course, starting in verse 22. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Okay, so answer A. Is the husband the head of the wife? Yes. Yes. And it's so clear, in fact, no one argues that. Complementarian, egalitarian alike agree the husband is the head of the wife. The issue is, what does that mean? Right? What does that mean? And here's the big question, okay, that this whole issue is dealing with, is the question of, sorry for that marker being terrible, I'm going to roll with it. The question of authority. Is there any sort of authority imbalance in the marriage? That's the question. Okay? So everyone agrees the husband is the head of the wife. But just the side that wants to say there's no difference says that that's just a way of saying source, like Adam was the source of Eve. That it has no authoritarian connotations. That there's no difference in authority between husband and wife. Husband as the head only means husband as the source of the wife. Okay. So what does this word actually mean? I got all these different markers, might as well use them. The Greek word here is kephale. That's the word always used for head. Kephale. What does that word mean? Now, anytime you want to find out what a word means in the original language, there's basically two ways to do that, a couple ways to do that, a few ways to do that. Here's the easiest. The first one is by looking it up in a dictionary, which in those languages is called a lexicon, basically a dictionary. It's a dictionary plus. It's like a dictionary, but it gives you a lot more. So if you ever wondered what a Greek word was, a great resource, by the way, is a website called Blue Letter Bible. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, in the languages, you can use a website called Blue Letter Bible. And there's a little button at the top. You type in your verse, and a little button that says Strong's, and you click it. And then it brings up your passage, and you can click any word, and it'll tell you the word that's the Greek word or the Hebrew word, and then it gives you the definition of the word, all the times it's used in the Bible, all different ways it's used in the Bible. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, it's a it's a helpful tool, and you don't got to use all the more complex stuff. That keeps it pretty simple. But a lexicon is basically a dictionary of the words that were used in biblical Greek, in Koine Greek. This word kephale, I looked at a bunch of lexicons, means head. and along with that, it says head, physical head, okay, so a physical head on a body, but also all the lexicons, something like, some say chief, some say highest, some say preeminent, but there's no question that this word in the lexicons means authority. Chief, preeminent, there is certainly in these dictionaries authority carried along with this word. And again, I encourage you to look these up for yourselves. Okay, so there's that. More importantly for us to do, to find the meaning of a word, is to see how it's used in the Bible and just look at the context, right? Just like you would reading a story, you're trying to find context clues. That's really the best thing we can do. So we're going to do that. We're going to look at some places this word is used. And all we're asking is authority here? Okay, is the idea of headship, when this word kephale is used, when this head word is used, is authority there? And really the question is authority there at all? Okay, that's what we're trying to get at. Because we know the husband's the head of the wife. The question is, does that have anything to do with authority? If it does, the whole debate's really settled. So we're just going to read the passages. I'm not really going to editorialize, and you decide for yourselves with just being honest with the text. Okay, because the position that I'm taking here in this series is that if you're just honest with the text and read it and pay attention to it, the natural reading from Genesis to Revelation is that the highest spiritual authority should be male, and that along with that, women can do about everything else underneath that. But that the highest spiritual authority is male. Equal in value, different in roles. Not a question of value, not a question of those things. Okay, let's look at the times this is used. You're still in Ephesians, I think. So go back to Ephesians chapter 1, starting in verse 20. Ephesians chapter 1, starting in verse 20. That he worked in Christ when he raised him from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion, and above every name that's named, not only in this age but also in the age to come. He put all things under his feet and gave him as kephale over all things to the church. Okay, there's the word. Far above all rule and authority and power and dominion, above every name that is named, only in this age, but the age to come. Verse 22, and he put all things under Christ's feet and gave him as head over all things to the church, which is his body, the fullness of him who fills all in all. Okay, so when that word is used there, and again, the other side has to say this word never means authority. Okay, if it means authority here, that would be enough. Okay, so you just reading that, does it seem like he's talking about authority? All right, look at chapter 4 of Ephesians. Verse 15. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it's equipped, when each part's working properly, makes the body grow so it builds itself up in love. Let me say this. If we just had that verse, I think you can make a good case that head just means source. There doesn't seem to be necessarily authority there. Okay, so that's interesting. Head as the part that's sort of feeding the rest of the body or supplying the rest of the body with direction. Ephesians chapter 5. We're still in Ephesians. Look at Ephesians 5. We're going to be coming back here, of course, one of the main sections on the topic. Verse 22. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Okay, flip to the right to Colossians, a couple more verses. Colossians chapter 1. Verse 18, 17. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. This is, of course, in that section we've been building from in our sermons. Verse 18, and he is the head of the body, the church. He's the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. Okay, so especially you guys knowing the context of Colossians there, and the whole point of what Paul's talking about Jesus, he says he is the head of the body of the church. Chapter 2, verse 10 of Colossians. Maybe the clearest of all of them. Verse 9. For in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily, and you have been filled in him who is the head of all rule and authority. The head of all rule and authority. Okay, let me give you a couple more, just because we're nothing if we're not thorough on Wednesday nights. In the Old Testament, so you probably know the Old Testament was written in Hebrew mostly, different than Greek. But the manuscripts, most of the manuscripts we have of the Old Testament are in Greek. They're translations of the Old Testament called the Septuagint, which is Greek Old Testament. So we can see the words that they use in the Old Testament in the Septuagint, the Greek translation, and know what so they use that word kephale a couple of times in the Old Testament. Let's look at those. Judges chapter 11. So this tells us what the early church thought of that word kephale. A couple more examples from the Old Testament. Judges chapter 11. Verse 11 says, so Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and leader over them. So when they translated this into Greek in the first century, or even before that, when they translated it into Greek, they used the word kephale for the word head, because that's the same word that they understood. So head and leader over them. That's one more. 2 Samuel. To the right a little bit. 2 Samuel chapter 22. Verse 44. It says, you delivered me from strife with my people. You kept me as the kephale of the nations. People whom I had not known served me. Head of the nations. People who I had not known served me. Okay, that's all the verses there. Okay, so we know husbands are head of wives. We know that. You can't say they're not biblically stated extremely clearly in sections that aren't even argued if they're cultural only. So the question is, does this word have anything to do with authority? And all the lexicons say that it does. All of them, 99% of them say that it does. And I think if you just read the places where the word is used, then you see naturally that obviously authority is in view here. Okay, so the husband is the head of the wife, and that has something to do with some authority imbalance in the marriage. I think to argue differently is to be dishonest with the scriptures. And that there is some authority imbalance in marriage, and that is part of the good design of God. Also, though it's not the end all, it's an important thing. Everyone throughout church history has understood headship to be an authority imbalance. That's a generalization, but virtually everyone, until relatively extremely recently, like 15 minutes ago, historically, thought headship was something to do with authority. Okay, now the more common word that we're going to move into is this idea of submission. Okay, so we have husband is head of the wife. We don't like that, but you just kind of got to deal with it if you don't like it. The other part, wives submit to your husbands. That's probably even worse, right? So do we got to deal with that one too? Wives submit to your husbands. Okay, let me say this. Look, if you hear nothing else, you got to hear this. And if you don't hear this, you're not going to hear any of the rest of this in a proper mindset. Okay? When the Bible speaks to married people, this is the most common thing I have to say in premarital counseling, marital counseling. This is the most common thing. So if you don't hear this, you're not going to hear any of it. And you're going to and as you hear this, you're going to have to keep reminding yourself of this the whole time we're talking about it. When the Bible talks to married people, when the Bible talks to husbands, it doesn't tell the husband anything about the wife. It just tells the husband things about the husband. And when the Bible talks to the wife, it doesn't tell the wife anything about the husband. It just tells the wife things about the wife. Here's what I mean. The Bible never says, husbands, make sure your wife submits. The Bible never says, wives, make sure your husband is leading you self-sacrificially. one of the greatest problems in marriages is that the husband and the wife is constantly looking over their shoulder to see if their partner is doing their job, to determine whether or not they're going to really do their job. Here's the charge to the husband. The charge of the husband is you lay down for your wife. You sacrifice for your wife. And if she doesn't submit, that is not even part of the command. It has nothing to do with the command, right? Whether or not your wife submits has nothing to do with you being the kind of husband God intends for you to be. Conversely, to the wife it says, submit to the husband as to the Lord. Meaning not because the husband is worth it all the time, because most of the time he probably isn't, but submit to him because you submit to God. And whether or not he's doing all the right things is, within reason, we'll talk about, inconsequential to you being a godly wife. The husband is to focus on the husband. The wife is to focus on the wife. Again, never saying things like, husbands, make your wives submit. That's abuse. That's what that is. And another, if one of you fills your role, it will get better. If one of you fills the role, the marriage will get better. Even if the other one never does, the marriage will be better if you do the role that God has given you. The key to every marriage, and again, I'm not saying this as someone who's been married, I've been married 10 years. I'm talking from the Bible. The key to the marriage is you do your part without looking to see if they're doing their part. So, as we're talking about these things, and this isn't going to end tonight because it's a big topic. We're going to keep talking about it. One of the key passages is in Colossians, so I'm going to preach about it too in a couple of weeks. One of the key thing is when we're reading these things, what's going to happen in your mind and my mind naturally is you're going to say, "Yeah, she's not doing that." That's what you're going to want to do. So I'm begging you, and I'm entreating you. You're going to have to fight that the whole time. If I say something to the wife, I ain't talking to you, husband. God wasn't either. If I say something to the husband, I ain't talking to you, wife. God wasn't either. I love, like in Ephesians 5, it makes the point and says, husbands, and then it gives you the command, right? Like the wives are over there. And then God turns and says, okay, now wives, right? He's not saying, here's how you better be make sure each other's doing right. No, you do you. You do your part. You focus on your part. And things will get better regardless if he or she does their part. And constantly you're going to see that the call is to do these things unto the Lord. Okay, this is in a culture where people weren't primarily marrying because they liked the person, but they were getting married for other reasons. Their parents married them, or who knows what. And it's to these people who are married to people that they probably didn't choose, at least not of all the choices like we get to today. It's to these people, Paul says, submit to that man. It's to these people, Paul says, lay down everything for her. Give up your own desires for her. It's to these people. And it may even be, just using Christian reasoning, it may even be more honoring to the Lord when your partner isn't reciprocating. Because there aren't many things more Christian than not being treated fairly, than you doing the right thing when no one else is. Okay. I'm gonna say that probably 10 more times as we go through this just to make sure you're remembering, because our just selfish selves. I hear what a wife's like and I'm like, yeah, Ariel, you listening, Ariel? You listening? No, that's not. Fight that in you. Okay. And Ariel's, of course, perfect, so that's not relevant. Let me say this also. When it comes to the particulars of what submission to a husband looks like. Okay, so heads up, I think wives are supposed to submit. Here's, when it comes to the particulars about what that looks like in any given scenario, in any given situation, I am not the main authority on that. Here's what I mean. Go to Titus chapter 2. So when it comes to the particulars, and what exactly it means for a wife to submit in this situation or that situation, or whether she should fight back in this situation, that situation, etc., I am not the primary authority on this. Titus chapter 2. Verse 3. Titus 2, verse 3. Older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They're to teach what is good. Verse 4. And so train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind, and submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. So, ladies, And one of the reasons I love Wednesdays is the opportunity for us to build relationships. The best people to learn from about how exactly submission works in this scenario or that scenario is women who have been married for longer and who have been Christians for a while. Is the older women in the room to teach you, what am I supposed to do here? I'll try to give you some biblical advice. They're better than me. So go to them. They've dealt with it in the nitty-gritty and in the dirt that is normal life. And they are the ones primarily charged with teaching that task. Again, even the preacher is never charged to outside of preaching the Bible, teach the young women how to submit. We get a direct command here. For older women, one of the things you are to do is teach the younger wives what it means to submit, how that looks, what it looks like. He was saying that in the first century. Surely it's true now. Okay, so this word submit, which is the other hot button word, I won't write out the Greek. The Greek word is hypotasso. That word submit is also one that necessarily carries authority along with it. The word literally means to rank yourself underneath. Okay? It's hard for that not to be an authority word. We know that when we say submit to God, right? So it is a word that has to do with authority. Okay, now let's do what we've been practicing and just look at the relevant passages. Try to be honest with what they say. Not going to finish this week. Probably won't finish next week, but we're looking at everything, trying to be thorough, trying to be honest, etc. First big passage, 1 Peter chapter 3. The one that probably comes to your mind first is Ephesians 5. We'll finish with that one. Okay, 1 Peter chapter 3. There's only 3 we're going to look at. And the second one's in Colossians, and so that'll be the one I preach on in a couple weeks. It's Colossians 3, which is coming up. 1 Peter chapter 3, starting in verse 1. Read this together. And again, I want you to think, if you had no other connotations, if you had no presuppositions about the Bible, and you read this, what would you think it meant? Because it's not rocket science. Verse 1. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, that is, even if some aren't Christians, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair, the putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that's frightening. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. Okay. So, be subject to your own husbands. That's what ESV says. Most versions, ESV doesn't, most versions say submissive. The word is the same word. Be subject to your own husbands, if you're following along with one of our ESVs, is the same word as submit, the hypotasso word. So be submissive or submit to your own husbands. Same word we're going to be looking at throughout all the passages that we'll look at. A couple of things to notice. It says submissive to your own husbands. Okay, the consistent charge biblically is not that women submit to men. The charge is that wives submit to husbands. Now, there's that, kind of the umbrella thing of elders and stuff, but that's not what I'm talking about. Direct one-on-one things. We have wives constantly. It says submit to your own husbands, not somebody else's husband, not some man over there. Some guy can't walk down the street and have any sort of authority in that sense over you. Only husbands. This is a marital thing. This is a marriage thing. If you're dating, doesn't count. If you're engaged, doesn't count. If you get married tomorrow, there's no headship. There's no authority. It is marriage and marriage alone. One of the beautiful things that comes along with marriage, in fact, is this relationship. And it doesn't exist outside of that relationship. It's husbands and wives and husbands. Okay. The whole section here, this is a little bit of Bible interpretation. The whole section is on submission. Okay, we know that because he starts with submission. And then it's a little less clear in verses 3 and 4 that it's still about submission. But then in verse 5, it's back to submission. Right? So be subject to your own husbands, verse 1. Verse 5, this is how women adorn themselves, submitting to their own husbands. The whole section's on submission. So verses 3 and 4 are also on submission. We don't just jump from topic to topic like this, like we're just going. It's all cohesive. It's all working together. And so, what do we see here about submission. Why is the wife charged to be subject? That's key, okay? Because if it just says, wives be subject to your husbands, because the culture will see it as a good thing, the culture that you're in right now. Right? Because it'll offend the culture too much, as if something that was what they were worried about back then. It'll offend the culture too much if you don't do that. Or if it grounds it in things more transcendent. If the reasons for the wives being subject is not cultural. Okay? And that's the whole really discussion is, anytime you read a passage of Scripture, we have to look for clues. Are the things he's saying just for this culture they're in right now today, or is he tying it to transcendent reality, things that are above culture, objective things? Okay. Firstly, he says, be subject to your own husbands, because your husband might be saved by your conduct. That's interesting. A lot to be made of there, the fact that you're told to submit to husbands, and obviously it even means to non-Christian ones, right? So it's not even just what if my husband's not a Christian? Tougher, because he's definitely not going to do his part. But you're still charged to do that, and in hopes that you might save him. If you know Lee Strobel, who's a Christian apologist, wrote The Case for Christ, The Case for Miracles, The Case for Heaven, The Case for Everything. He's really milking that cow, and he's doing pretty well. Lee Strobel, he's a wonderful apologist. That's how he was saved. Him and his wife were militant atheists, hated God. His wife came to Christ by the grace of Jesus. And he kept going home thinking she was going to sit down and argue with him and preach at him. And she just changed. Her life changed. The way she treated him changed. And he tells it all the time. That's what saved him, is he saw real change in his wife. That verse is like the least trouble in the page. That submitting to your husbands so that through your attitude and your goodness they might be saved. Also, apparently, because it is in itself good. When they see, verse 2, your respectful and pure conduct, that's what will cause them to be saved. That's a parallel. Submitting to your husbands is defined as respectful and pure conduct. Those are the same thing. That God says submitting to your husband, even the non-Christian one, is respectful and good. Good. That's a good thing to do, which is beyond the culture. Do not let your adorning be external, braiding of hair, putting on gold jewelry, but let your adorning, again, we're still talking about submission, adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. Basically, the idea there is that it's like a character issue. Like it's a thing of high character for a woman to submit to her husband. We also have verse 4. Again, imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. It's precious in the sight of God. For his design to be working the way it was designed to work, it is precious in God's sight. Our culture sees it as repulsive. If a wife ever even said something like, well, let me just ask my husband first, culture's like, And then we have that holy women have done this. Verse 5. This is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves. If there was any confusion about this all being about submission. Adorning themselves. How? By submitting to their own husbands. And that was adorning themselves with character and goodness and beauty. But that was a way of adorning themselves and making themselves precious to their husbands and to God. And then Peter uses Sarah as an example. As Sarah obeyed Abraham. That's a trigger word, right? Obeyed Abraham. Whoa. That's just that word, we get fired up about the word, but like we obey people all the time. It's the same with submit. You obey your boss. You obey your friend when you go to their house and they ask you not to use that bathroom, right? Obedience is a constant part of our life. So Sarah obeyed Abraham is not different than saying Sarah submitted to Abraham. Don't let that hold you up. But it says, Sarah obeyed Abraham, another trigger, calling him Lord. And you are her children if you do good and not fear anything. Let's look at that. There's Genesis chapter 18. There's only one time where she calls him Lord, so that he must be referring to this occasion. Genesis chapter 18. Sarah calls him Lord. And you'll notice that in your New Testament, it's all lowercase. Right? There's even the word Lord isn't capitalized. In the Old Testament especially, when the word Lord is in reference to God, Yahweh, all the letters are capitalized, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. That is not the case here in this passage. Genesis 18, verse 12. So Sarah laughed at herself, saying, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? Look at verse 13, by the way. The Lord said to Abraham. Notice the difference there. In verse 13, your Bible probably capitalizes all those letters because that's the word Yahweh. But the word before that is not the word Yahweh. My Lord is old. All kind of reasons. We don't have an English word that's the same as that word. When Sarah said, calls Abraham Lord, it's not the same as Lord in English. It's about as good as we can do. But the word Lord in English is much more pregnant than that. It's much more weighty. So this is not saying that wives should be calling their husbands Lord. It's just a part of that submission. It's just saying this position of authority, that there is an authority thing there. She's recognizing that, and she is praised for that. She does see Abraham as the leader of the family. That is highly offensive today, but she sees it that way, and she's praised for it. And Peter says that's how women should adorn themselves, and it's beautiful, and it's precious in the sight of God, and it even has the ability to save the husband by it. It's a character thing even. And then, of course, we have back in 1 Peter. We have verse 7, which we looked at last time, which says, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. And there's even some authority language there, right? As you would, it would be odd to tell the one of lower authority to live in an understanding way, showing honor to them, etc. But again, we have this crucial complementary in truth where he says, heirs with you, right? Not heirs underneath you in any sense. When it comes to your heirship, you are on totally equal ground. This is not a question of value. It's not a question of opposition before God. Co-heirs with you. Just like we looked at in Galatians 3 last week, that we are all sons of God and that we all get the same inheritance of God and knowing Christ. It has nothing to do with any of that stuff. Nothing to do with a hierarchy of position next to God, in front of God. All it has to do with is that God has given us different roles. Co-heirs with Christ. And yet still, it is good that the husband be charged with self-sacrificial leadership, headship, and the wife be charged to submit to that leadership. Not lesser vessel, just weaker vessel. Totally equal in value and inheritance. And then what always is the case, dear husbands, what always is the case is the one who has the authority is the one who is warned. The one who has the authority is the one who's warned. It is a big deal. The way you handle the authority that God has given you. I said before, this is not one of those things that when God created everything, and if you were the man and your wife was the woman, and God said, okay, one of you is going to have to take this, you wouldn't want it if you knew what was involved in it. You would say, I really hope he gives it to her. But he didn't. He put it on you, and he says, if you do what's wrong with this, there is going to be serious consequences. In a way that he doesn't say that to the woman. Since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, just an example, so that your prayers may not be blocked, is that word. Like that is such a big deal that you handle your authority correctly in a self-sacrificial way. It's such a big deal that your prayers won't make it to heaven in that sense. That God won't hear your prayers. It will be as if God does not hear you pray. And who knows the other spiritual connotations that come along with that. We're out of time, but let me wish I could do all one big teaching and have it all in one big context, but it would take us multiple hours. The husband is given authority in the marriage, not for the good of the husband, but for the good of the wife and for the good of the children. Just like I am given authority over Cohen, not so that I can make sure Cohen really lifts me up and makes my life better, but so that I can lay down myself to make his life better. So I can lay down myself to make him better. So I can lay down myself to sacrifice for him. That's the authority I have. That's right. We all know that. That's parental authority. Like if you think that being a parent means that your life gets easier while theirs gets harder, you have never been a parent, right? It's the opposite of that. Things get more difficult for you so that their life is better, that they are made more like Jesus, that they are better humans. That it's about you laying down for them. That's parenting, right? It's not you using them as a step stool to make yourself taller, right? Parenting is the opposite of that, and we know that. And yet we know the parent's the one with all the authority. There's never an occasion where the child has the authority over the parent. And yet, the parent should always be the one going down. Always be the one laying down their desires so the child can have theirs, right? The parents are the one taking the kids to practices and taking them to stuff and taking them to, right? I mean, I've told you before, I thought my parents just loved taking me to practice. Thought that was their dream life. I've learned on this side of parenthood, not always the case, right? That you lay down your opportunity for your selfish pleasures for the sake of your child. That's what parenting is in large part. It's awesome, right? It's wonderful, it's beautiful, but it's the opposite of selfish. The husband is given the same, there's parallels that the parallel is the same. The authority parallel is not the same. Very different language. It's different. The husband doesn't have authority over the wife like he has over the child. But the type of authority, the type of headship, the type of leadership is the same. The husband has been given authority not to lift himself up, to fulfill his desires, to do what he'd like to do more, but for the opposite of that. Just like he will for his child, to lay down his desires for the sake of his wife. To lay down his selfishness for the sake of his wife, to lay down his selfish pleasures for the sake of his wife. That's the kind of authority. Not fun, tough, you know? That's what we've been given. The man was made for battle, for war. It's not fair, it's not fair. Man was made, little boys cry, it's not fair. When Lance and Jerry were 6 years old, I stopped letting them say it's not fair. Of course it's not fair. Who cares? It's not fair. It's not going to be fair. If you want to be a godly husband, it's never going to be fair. If it's fair, you're not being a good husband. All right, I'm over time. So we're going to continue this next time in Colossians 3, it's just a couple of verses. We'll be quick on it. And then we'll get into Ephesians 5. So we should, if we don't get done next time, we'll be close. Thoughts, questions, comments, statements?